Welcome to my show, simply entitled Women Influencers, where you will find inspirational stories of successful women in business. I am Veronica Malolas, CCIM, founder and CEO of the Capstrata Group of companies, providing commercial real estate development, brokerage, and property management services in the greater Orlando area. Today's guest is Diane Allen, concertmaster, professional violinist, best-selling author of Flow, Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do, a TEDx and keynote speaker. So get ready to learn and be inspired. Please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe below. I welcome your comments and please share with someone who can benefit from this podcast.
Hi, Diane. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Veronica.
I am so excited to have you because you've such a unique story. And if you don't mind, I'll just jump right in. I know you're in Oregon and I'm in Florida, two different sides of the United States, but here we are together. And I can't wait to hear you talk about your story, how you grew up in your environment, and how you got to where you are today.
Well, where I am now and compared to where I started is like the difference is really interesting. And it's always interesting to look back on your story. So, currently I'm a professional speaker and I speak for associations and corporations. And it's my belief that when you activate your flow state, it's the gateway to exceeding your potential and loving what you do. So how did I get to that place, right? It's like a unique thing. I'm a violinist and I perform when I speak. How many flow state speakers who play the violin do you know, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, not many.
I think I might be a category of one, right? So when I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And Cleveland has one of the greatest orchestras in the world. I think they're in the top 5. And my parents would take my brother and sister and I to Severance Hall to hear concerts when we were very little. So little, Veronica, that I remember the seat folding up on me and I couldn't hold it down, right? My legs were just kind of flopping. And I remember this one concert in particular, the force of the music, and I was little, right? But it felt like the force of the music was just pinning me to the back of the chair. I remember the tingles and the hair raising, and it was just so extraordinary. And I remembered loving watching the violin bows go up and down and up and down. It was, oh my goodness. So at some point, my parents said, well, what instrument do you like? And I said, I like the violin. So that's how that started. And so my parents always supported me in taking violin lessons. I think that what's really interesting is that when I was 15 years old, it's the time when you're talking to career counselors, right? What are you going to do when you grow up? What do you have to do to get there, right? Are you going to go to college, right? All of these kinds of conversations. And I remember this vivid memory. I was 15. I was in my room. I was blasting the music. And no, it was not rock and roll. It was a violin concerto. And
wow.
In my imagination, I was pretending in my imagination that I was the soloist. I was pouring the core of my soul into every note I played and just being really deeply connected with the music. And I remembered that, right? But why would I remember that? Which is kind of funny, right? Why would I even remember that? And, the thing about my parents is that they always, in their own way, talked about doing what you love. It was, my mom, she was a prolific painter. And, she had a day job, but come home at night, she would be painting. So she did her passion, outside of work. But my dad was in sales and his job, paid the bills. But he brought himself to work. He loved telling stories and he loved being of service to people and he loved helping people out. So he brought what he loved to his job. And so this was the environment that I grew up in. So
wow, that's amazing because I was actually going to ask you if any of your parents were actually in the symphony, or if they were musicians. And that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
So the support, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so I ended up at the Manhattan School of Music for my college training. Rigorous New York City violin training. I've never worked harder in my life. It was so rewarding, right? To dig in and really pour your heart into everything. And the training was spectacular. I was just so in my element and loving it. That said, when I graduated, you know what I was faced with?
What were you facing?
Audition anxiety.
Ah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Yes.
My high skill level was way up here. My ability to perform under pressure was way down low. Like, you go through all of this training, right? A violinist is like, the same amount of training as a brain surgeon. It's, playing a high precision instrument, right? And doing it under high pressure. And I had to crack this nut if I was going to become fulfilled in my work and do what I love, right? So that was the
Absolutely.
nut to crack. And I want to say it was about 10 years after graduation when I had this random moment when I was auditioning for a teaching job and something happened. That same feeling when I performed in the orchestras that I was playing in, where the music would just sweep you away and, time would stand still and you were so immersed. It was as if nothing else was going on, right? You were so deeply focused on what you were doing, and playing in orchestras is incredibly fulfilling, right? So I'm at an audition and somehow I slipped into that. I slipped into that state, which is called the flow state. And in this audition, I rocked and I got the teaching job.
That's awesome.
And I fully attribute it to being in flow. And it just so turns out that this teaching audition was not just like in front of one person. It was a large group of parents and students and fellow musicians, and I was teaching all day long in front of an audience. Turns out the conductor of the local symphony orchestra happened to be in that audience. And as soon as I took that job, he hired me to become the concertmaster, which is the lead violinist of the Central Oregon Symphony.
Wow. I mean, talk about being in flow. Wow, that's amazing. What an amazing outcome.
So flow was the gateway. That was my breakthrough moment. And I just want to take a really quick moment to define what flow is. It's not a mindset. Going with the flow is very passive. That means you're putting yourself aside and kind of, rolling with things. But being in flow falls under the umbrella of positive psychology. And so it's about taking a look at what's working well in your life and reverse engineering it so you can create more of that goodness in your life. That's what positive psychology is. But the flow state is this neurological state where you've got a group of peak performance hormones that are released in your system that completely support you to be in this state where it feels like time goes by and you just love what you do. You're not even aware of time. You're not even aware of yourself. Your inner critic is turned off. You've got ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue. You're in this positive feedback loop where the more you get into it, the more you get out of it, and you're experiencing meaning, joy, and fulfillment. That's the flow state. And so musicians and athletes, we rely heavily on being in flow in order to do our job, in order to always be in our excellence under high pressure. So I became very used to the habit of getting into flow when I was doing this teaching job and when I was playing as the lead violinist of the orchestra. And so that's basically, the background of how I came to playing the violin and how I came into really, becoming and developing my expertise in flow.
My next question to you would absolutely be, if there was one challenge that you overcame that you're most proud of, what would
Yeah.
that be?
So we have, this is like a 2-tiered challenge. Okay. So the first challenge that occurred was, I am just, my husband also played in the orchestra with me, and we stopped counting after we performed 1,000 concerts. So I don't know how many concerts I've actually performed. I would venture to say it's closer to 3,000
Wow.
over the years from, beginning, from graduating college to where I am now. And so, tapping into flow became routine. And well into my role with the concertmaster, I was at a concert where there was a ginormous, big interruption, and it threw me off my game. And I was unable to feel the music. I was unable to tap back into flow. And it freaked me out because I did not show up as a leader that day. It was not, it was a low-key event. It wasn't a big deal, but it shook my foundation, something that I took for granted that I could turn on to flow and make it routine was suddenly gone. And so that was the night that I sat down and reverse engineered how I get into flow. And I designed a 3-step system, the 3-step flow strategy system, where it's simple 3 prompts to discover, how each of you uniquely get into flow. And when you can define what that is for yourself, you own it. And if you can own it, then you can recreate it. So that was the first challenge. That in that 2-tier challenge.
Well, yeah, and I can almost imagine you spoke about musicians and athletes being in kind of that same space, and I can almost imagine athletes being that way too, how they're off their game sometimes.
Yes.
And so please, share a little bit more.
Yes. So when you can really fully understand how you uniquely get into flow, I can't say it's foolproof, but you definitely feel like you can tap in and feel much more in control of your performance, right? So well into 15 years into this role as teaching and performing, my son was at the height of his teenage rebellion, and at the same time, my mom had Alzheimer's. She couldn't paint anymore. And I was her primary caregiver, although she was in an assisted living home. I was still, in charge of everything. And Veronica, I was sitting on stage playing a Beethoven symphony, and I was numb. I could not feel the music. Couldn't feel it. I thought that putting flow on the back burner was like the right thing to do while I was, dealing with the stressors of, dealing with my son and my mom. My violin students started leaving me for other teachers. I took a year's leave from the orchestra to see if I could figure out what's going on. And a year later, I hadn't. So I had to let them know that I couldn't serve anymore. It was really scary because I didn't know what was going on. I did know that I had been doing professional public speaking on the side. And I started, developing that more. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm done with the violin. I literally sold my entire music collection, my high precision violin bow, and my gorgeous antique violin that had been my musical voice for decades. I was that stuck, and I could not see any path back to flow.
Wow.
So fast forward, I was at a film festival watching a documentary about a group of counterculture artists who were questioning everything. Who's to say this is art and this is not art? Who's to say this art's valuable and this art? They were just, it was so thought-provoking. I loved it. And I don't know what happened, but for some reason, I could feel the power of the violin coming back into my life. So after some experimentation, I discovered I wasn't done playing the violin. I was done with classical music. And in the midst of taking care of my mom and my son, it was hard for me to decipher what was going on in my life. And I think that's what women do. We put ourselves aside, right? Frequently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it wasn't until like years later that I came back to that. And the first thing I did was I started experimenting, and I experimented with an electric violin. And that's what I've been playing ever since.
Wow.
It's been really fun. So I have had this metamorphosis. So I feel like I loved that gorgeous violin that I had. I have a story behind that too. It was like a violin that I rescued out of the back of somebody's trunk of their car, literally. And I brought it to life. I had it worked on, and I, took it to different luthiers to make it sound its best. And it was a gorgeous little violin. I feel like it served its purpose. I feel very complete. I don't feel like it's the sound that matches where I am right now. So I'm okay with it, but yet I still have like a little tear behind my eye.
Of course. Yeah, I can imagine.
So those two challenges, and so the electric violin, and then combining it with the speaking, where I'm helping people to get into flow while I deliver these keynotes. There are exercises that we combine the music with audience exercises that get people in flow while they're learning about it. So now everything I'm doing is paying it forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing is that it is, like I said earlier, it is my belief that when people connect with their flow state, you love what you do. If you're feeling burned out and drained and like you're lost in the shuffle, how do you uniquely get into flow? Those moments when you just lose sense of time and you love what you're doing. Reconnect with that and bring it to work like my dad did. So that's when I realized my book, the title, Flow, Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do. I'm not kidding. It was only 2 weeks ago that I made the connection that I say love what you do on here. And that's how I was raised by my parents.
Wow, amazing. And you know what? I am so in awe of people like you, for instance, who have reflected and who have introspected and have looked back and have looked forward and have put themselves in a place where you are today. I saw your TEDx. It was amazing.
Thank
So
you.
I wanted to ask you about influence. If there was one outcome you're most proud of that you had influence on, what would that be?
So I'm holding up a picture of the orchestra I used to play in, if you're listening, on audio. And so this picture is taken as if somebody was like suspended in the stage above the orchestra. So you're looking down and you see the conductor, and then right to the side of him is me. And then you see all of the other players. So I don't know if you realized or even thought of this, but I had to lead without ever speaking a word.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Right? And it was my job to translate the conductor's vision into actionable steps for the orchestra. So when you activate your flow state, not only are you tapping into what makes you tick, but you're coming from a very deep sense of purpose. The way I uniquely get into flow, my flow strategy is I'm sharing the message of the music and I'm sharing the experience. That's what I'm doing on the inside. But why it's so meaningful for me is that music unifies us. And unity really is the thing that brings the tears to my eye. I mean, if I can facilitate that, that's me being in my purpose. So this is my flow strategy, and having defined this for myself, that means that when I'm on stage, this is what I am doing on the inside. I am sharing the message, I'm sharing the experience, and I'm coming from a place of purpose. And when you are coming from a place of purpose, your energy naturally radiates 3 feet all around you. Everybody in that 3-foot circle senses your energy and they sync up. You see, when we are in purpose, we're igniting the 40,000 neurons in our heart, and the electromagnetic field of the heart reaches out 60% greater than the brain. And so it's measured that when we are deeply in our heart space, especially for a sustained period of time, when you're playing a symphony, right? I'm prolonging the period of time I'm feeling purpose. All these people around me sense it. They sync up. Now they're exuding their 3-foot circles, and the ripple effect continues. And this is how you influence others to follow you non-verbally. This is like the energy of influence, right? It's the energy of enthusiasm, right? Being transferred into enrolling other people into your energy and becoming influential.
I love that, Diane. I have to tell you that just very recently, a few days ago, we lost our brother-in-law after 12 hours of open heart surgery. There were
Oh,
complications, and I was just, as you were saying all of this, I was just thinking about our family getting together every day since he passed,
mm,
and how music actually has brought us together because we would sing a song that we were singing to him on his last hours. And you're right, it's so powerful and unifying of how someone's feelings could be expressed through music. And like you said, it would bring others to that same feeling. And
yes.
that allowed us to actually grieve together and mourn together.
Oh,
And I
so
absolutely, and
powerful.
it's a totally different sort of situation as what you're describing, and yet it's the same.
Yes.
And so I absolutely love what you just said because it just really deeply resonated with me just now. And I wanted to ask you if there was one piece of advice that you could give to our audience today, what would that be?
Well, as I mentioned, when a musician gets into the music, they're getting into the flow state. When an athlete gets into the zone, right, they are
Mhm.
getting into their flow state. And we rely heavily on being in flow. So we really practice it. But everybody's wired for this. So, basically, I'm just going to say, just get into your life like a musician gets into the music. And if you can figure out your own unique flow strategy, which you can see in my TED talk, and I've got it in my book as well, right? The steps to get there, that you can get into flow on demand.
Wow, amazing. And I'm totally into what you just said. I love that, Diane. I really, really love that. So I think we've come to the part of our interview where you get to ask me a question. So please go ahead.
The question I have for you is, uh, do you have a strong sense of purpose? And it might be different in different areas of your life. You just
Mhm.
described like this incredible experience with your family, right?
Mhm.
But maybe in your professional life, maybe you're showing a property to somebody, right? Or like is there a strong sense of purpose for you in that environment?
Well, yeah, and it's crazy to think that your father was in sales. And of course,
Yeah.
what I do is really in sales.
Yes.
But my purpose has always been to continue to build a community. And I
Mm,
think that that brings what I do to a different sort of perspective. So every time I'm touching a client or a customer, I'm always thinking about building this community and being able to have some kind of impact in our surroundings. For instance, you talk about leadership. I have a team of 6, and I always talk to them about a higher purpose than just closing a sale. Because at the end of the
yes.
day, what we do is about touching other people, being able to bring people across the finish line, if that is their significant goal, and how we could be a part of that in a service. Now, I'm entering into a development sort of space where I'm building momentum to build a development company. And I've seen it in the past where if I'm part of a development, 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years later, I actually see a bustling community,
Mm,
a community that actually now becomes more vibrant because of the work that we put in. And that to me is a higher purpose
hmm.
than just having to close a sale. And it's really crazy how a lot of people miss that. And so
Yes.
I really, really appreciate that I talk to people like you, Diane, and so many others who really want to be able to focus on purpose rather than a transaction.
And I just want to elaborate really quickly and give people an how to, because let's say you're having an off day. You've got back to back meetings, and all of a sudden you're faced with somebody who's very close to making their final decision, right? And if they're close, that means they still have a couple questions that are going to give them that peace of mind, right? And if you're
Mhm.
coming from like, oh my gosh, it's been a crazy busy day, not the right vibe. But it's really as simple as just taking 30 seconds, right? To close your eyes, put your hands on your heart, and literally remind yourself of that purpose of community, of building community. Because when, like I said earlier, if you can define these things for yourself, then they become tools that you can actually use to tap in.
Yeah.
So it's just literally as simple as that. Then you can come into shift gears and come into from a place of purpose and a place of influence, right? Because your enthusiasm is going to be there. That's going to be very infectious, and they're going to feel much more grounded in their decision coming if you're exuding that energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that what you speak about actually applies not just in the music industry, but actually everywhere. It could be in even nonprofits or for-profit corporations, or even in the way that we educate our children. I mean, it's just so amazing what you're doing. And so I wanted to ask you, Diane, if people wanted to connect with you or find your book, could you tell us a little bit about how to do that?
Yes. First of all, I have a gift for people. It's tinyurl.com/flowstategift. And it has cliff notes of a lot of things that we talked about plus more. And then you can find my book on Amazon, Flow, Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do. If there's a second here, there's one more quick story I want to send people off with, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. I want to go back to that 15-year-old, right? The 15-year-old who was in the room blasting the music and feeling like I was the soloist, right?
Yeah.
So I was on a podcast interview about 3 years ago, and it was towards the end of the podcast, and he was summarizing, and he's like, okay, Diane, clearly you're not 15 in your room blasting the music. After 28 years, you're done teaching violin. You don't even play in an orchestra anymore, but you're giving keynotes and you're combining your music. You're performing solo. So, from where I sit, it looks like you have become the soloist. And I never saw it. And that was the day I realized that when I had that vision when I was 15 years old, I was so into the music. I was in flow. And when we are in flow, we have ideas and insights come in. We've got daydreams, we've got pipe dreams, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
But what I learned from Tyler is that when you have these ideas, that these are not ideas for you to shut down, brush under the rug, and discredit, because they exist for you to see your true genius and your heart's most burning desires.
Oh, I absolutely agree and love that. I mean, it's when we're in the flow that our creativeness opens up, and just everything just kind of energy is just really just overpowering, and it's amazing how powerful we can become from that. I love it. I absolutely love it. And Diane, I have to tell you, this was such a fabulous interview, and I really appreciate you being with us today. And I'm sure our audience is going to be so thrilled just listening to you speak about this. So I want to thank you again. And I hope one day that we can cross paths and maybe have a coffee whenever that presents itself.
Maybe I'll see you at a conference. I have spoken for real estate conferences, so.
Yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, there
and
are.
You live in Orlando.
I do. Yeah, I do.
So many conferences are there.
Absolutely. It's the conference world. Yeah, for sure. But thank you so much, Diane. And I wish you all the very best. And I'm sure I'll see you on other big stages. And if I ever do, I'll come to the backstage and I'll say hello to you. It's so amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.